As an orchestra conductor who works in classical music but loves and listens to music of all genres, when I heard that Rosalia's new album would feature an orchestra, choir, 13 languages, and she promoted the album saying this,
So I would listen a lot of the classics, so Mahler, a lot of Mahler, and a lot of Maria Callas.
I got very excited. If you don't know who Rosalia is, she is a very talented Spanish artist who got very famous with an album that fused flamenco with pop and trap while taking inspiration in a 13th century medieval novel. And so this new album, LUX, is a complete 180 from all her previous work, in that even though there are still very many different genres in it, the thread that binds it all together is the use of an orchestra, but also, in my opinion, Rosalia was inspired by very many different elements from classical music other than it features an orchestra. So I want to quickly look at what the album is, how it's structured, what it was inspired by, and then show you specifically some elements from classical music that Rosalia used for very specific reasons. And then in the end, I sort of want to talk about why classical music or an orchestra was exactly what she needed to convey the message of her album, and also why I'm a little bit afraid of some of the discourse around this album. LUX is an album, according to Rosalia, inspired by different female saints across different cultures and time. Rosalia has said that she spent 1 year reading stories about different saints while she was reflecting about her own spirituality, and this is why there are so many languages, because if a song is about an Italian saint, then the song will feature Italian and so on and so forth. This inspiration sometimes is obvious, or you can sort of see it in the lyrics, and sometimes it's more like a trigger that she had to write a song, but it wouldn't be apparent if she didn't tell us about her process. For example, in the song Mio Cristo, which is completely in Italian, she based it in the friendship between Clara and Francisco de Assis, which are very important figures in Christianity. And when you see the lyrics, you can see it could be from the perspective of Clara speaking about Francisco. But for example, in the song Reliquia, which means relic, Rosalia sings about how she left or lost something of herself in every single place that she's been to in the world. And she has said in an interview that this idea was triggered by a Peruvian saint called Santa Rosa de Lima, whose relics are spread around the world. Berghain is in German, probably because it was inspired by the saint, scientist, and musician Hildegard von Bingen, not to be confused with Hildegard von Blinging, a very, very cool YouTube channel that does medieval covers of current songs. In her honor, of course. Now, Rosalia is by no means the first artist to ever put out an album that has a theme or a concept that runs through it. And in classical music, we have what we call song cycles, or Lieder, which is literally German for songs, which are kind of this idea in the sense that they are not stage works like opera. They are sung and accompanied by a piano or sometimes an orchestra, and they have a common theme that runs through all the songs. For example, in Gustav Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, which is a devastating song cycle about losing one's children. But Rosalia might be one of the more popular artists to put so many languages in one album. And this is really exciting to me because I think for a long time, the idea within opera was that the languages were a barrier, a problem for audiences. And I think when we have artists like this that trust their audiences to use Google Translator, or with K-pop being more popular in countries that don't speak Korean, I think there is this curiosity for languages that we can definitely provide in opera. This is something that drew me to opera at the beginning, the fact that it's sung in so many languages. And if you've never been to an opera performance, there are subtitles above the stage for every performance, so we are Google translating it for you. But now let's look at the musical aspects of the album. Rosalia recorded this with an orchestra, but not just any orchestra, the London Symphony Orchestra, which sits comfortably in the top 10 of orchestras in the world. In an interview, Rosalia was asked how long she worked with the London Symphony Orchestra, and she said this.
How long did you work with the London Symphony Orchestra for?
Very little. like maybe 3 days or something, 3, 4 days.
You did all of this in 3 or 4 days?
I thought that saying slow's reaction was really interesting because actually this amount of time is absolutely standard. I would even go as far as saying that for the amount of music, 3 days is actually a lot. For you to have an idea, if there is a concert program on a given, I don't know, Friday, chances are they'll start rehearsing Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, depending on the repertoire, and then it's 2 or 3 days of rehearsal, concert, and then start again next week or the week after with a completely different program. In that same interview, she really emphasizes that there were no loops, in the sense that if something is repeated in a song, she didn't just copy paste it from the first recording of it that she did, she sung it again. And I think this is Rosalia trying to bring the spirit of classical music, but also live performance in a way to the recording process, which I thought was very interesting. So let's get to it. How is the orchestra used? How does it sound? Yes, there is an orchestra more or less in every single track of this album, but I want to talk about specific elements from classical music and opera that influence Rosalia's writing beyond the presence of the orchestra. Let's take the opening track, a song about the contrast between how we lead life on earth and how she imagines heavenly life to be. Personally, the mix of orchestra, choir, and production elements in this track is one of my favorites, but I want to talk about a specific harmonic resource that Rosalia uses called the Picardy third. To explain it in very simple terms, this happens when you have a song that is set in the minor key, and as you're getting to the end, instead of resolving in that minor key, say you're in C minor, instead of resolving in C minor, you surprisingly switch it up and resolve in C major. This little trick is very effective and surprising because, very broadly speaking, minor keys tend to make us feel sad, melancholic, and major keys tend to make us feel happier and more positive. And so the switch up at the very end has a very sort of shocking effect. And this is what Rosalia does in this track. We hear at some point this phrase said very firmly in a minor key of D minor. And then we hear it again at the end, but instead of ending with D minor like it did before, it ends with D major. And this resource has to have come from Bach. Rosalia has said that she listened to a lot of Bach in the preparation for this album, and Bach really used this a lot. The whole Baroque period used this a lot, and especially in his religious music, in his chorales. And this is very effective in a song that reflects a lot about how we're leading our life on earth. It leaves you with a sudden sense of hopefulness at the very end. Now, there are other tracks where you can see more influence from opera beyond the idea of singing with an operatic technique. We'll talk about that later. Like the song Mio Cristo, the one that I mentioned is sung fully in Italian. Now, on a first listen, you might not really see any influence. Rosalia sings sort of as she normally does. The harmonies are relatively pop-like. You might think that Bergain, a song where she does sing more with an operatic projection, let's say, has more influence from opera. But there is one very specific little section in Mio Cristo that makes me think that Rosalia was listening to a lot of opera when she wrote it, and that's this little section. This little connection, usually chromatic, sung in one vowel between one musical phrase and the next, usually between a dominant chord and the tonic chord, is incredibly common and typical, specifically in Italian opera. Now, throughout the whole album, I really appreciate the different orchestrations that they used. It's not always a full orchestra, sometimes some instruments get to shine more than others. For example, in the end of La Rumba del Perdón, you have the voice accompanied almost only by cellos. In the beginning of Magnolias, you have this lovely clarinet solo. And I also really liked how the timpani was used a lot, also in a very soloistic way, and kind of as a replacement of the typical beat in music production. I'm sorry, I have no idea how this is properly called, but I thought the fact that the timpani has so many overtones and harmonics, the sound is so rich that I thought it was really cool and interesting to hear in a track like this. Obviously, I am biased because I love orchestra instruments. And the final track of the album, Magnolias, which talks about dying and then possibly ascending, uses not only the orchestra but also a full chorus and an organ. And I can't really prove this, but because Rosalia said that she listened to so much Mahler in preparation for this, I'm willing to bet that she was inspired by Mahler's Second Symphony final movement, which also speaks about similar topics and features a huge orchestra, a huge chorus and organ. And I will come back to this Mahler mentioned later on, but I wanted to also mention it here. Just in case you've never listened to that piece, please go listen to that piece. You will thank me later. And all in all, I just had the feeling listening to this album that it came from a person that was really very open and influenced by different genres and sources, one of them being classical music, of course, and that this led to some songs being about topics that you might not see every day on the radio charts. For example, in the song Memoria, which is one of my favorites by far, this song is sung in Portuguese. It has elements from fado, which, is a genre that would touch on topics like this. And it speaks a lot about memories, about how this changed through time, but it also talks about being remembered. And this instantly made me think of one of the most beautiful arias in opera, which comes from Dido and Aeneas, which is in English. And similarly, the character who is about to die is asking to be remembered, but for her fate not to be. And I'm just going to play it. And now I have some sort of personal thoughts about why I think classical music inspired Rosalia so much in this album about spirituality, why I think it's a really good fit to incorporate this classical music elements, orchestra, choir, in an album like this. And I'll explain this with an example. I am personally not a religious person. I would describe myself as an atheist. And I used to sing a lot in choir. I loved it. There were two pieces that I was singing that I almost couldn't sing because I was so moved to tears. Bach's motet Jesu, Meine Freude, which translates to Jesus, my happiness, and Mahler's Second Symphony and movement. And I always thought, how can it be that lyrics that speak to a religion I don't personally profess could move me so? And I think there is something in the music that translates directly the feelings that, for example, that Bach has when he follows Jesus and when he follows the religion that he believes in. And, the happiness and the comfort. There is this passage in the motet where the lyrics speak first to a lot of chaos and confusion. And then it says, I'm going to stand here and sing in complete calmness, in complete peace. And musically, the contrast between the confusion and then this held notes that symbolize peace instantly made me feel this sense of warmth and safety that Bach felt. And And similarly in Mahler's Second Symphony, it's very interesting because Mahler wrote the text himself based on different sources. But much like with Bach, I was always able to sense through the music this anguish that Mahler is talking about in a way, this need to know what you're here for, what's the purpose of being on earth. And I guess the point I am trying to make is that I find it a perfect pairing for Rosalia to explore this idea of spirituality, which doesn't necessarily relate specifically to one religion over another. I think that she's trying to explore what spirituality means to her. And I find classical music a perfect vessel for that, because I always felt that I could think about spirituality through a lot of pieces of classical music. Even though they were specifically attached to specific religions, I still could have a sense of all those thoughts and all those questions that came to me straight from the music. I used to feel when I was very young that I would listen to symphonies and it would be like listening to a mystery. To me, the fact that that existed and made me feel that way was mysterious. In any case, I'm really excited about this album, and this is where I want to talk about that discourse I mentioned at the beginning, because I've seen a lot of, is this classical music? Is this opera? Is Mio Cristo an aria? Is she singing operatically? And I kind of don't see the point of those discussions. I don't think Rosalia ever said, I am now a classical musician and demand to play at the, I don't know. I just think she got inspiration from that, as from with many other genres. If you listen to this album, there are still flamenco elements, there are pop elements, there are elements from many different inspiration sources, and I think that's beautiful. And she speaks a lot about the other in all the interviews I've read, about learning from the other and the other experiences and the other cultures. And I think this is an opportunity to do that. If you like the album, great. If you don't, that's fine. Just don't be mean about it. But I don't see the need to categorize it, because also classical music is a term that classical musicians don't like. It bulks together 500 years of music that has nothing to do with each other when you look at the extremes. So I find it not a very interesting discussion, and I hope that we can welcome the fact that this is a very popular artist that has a huge platform, a lot of resources, and she chose to do this and to present this to a lot of people that perhaps are now interested in classical music or opera or not. Also, I really like her music in general. El Mal Querer is a great album. I also really like this album. I just only heard it 2 times, so I want to give it more time. Also, Rosalia, si estás escuchando esto y necesitas una directora de orquesta para ir en tour, acá estoy. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Please just be very respectful in the comments, because why wouldn't you? And I will see you next time.